Welcome to Practice Excellence Live. I'm John Stokdyk, the Global Editor of AccountingWEB. It's my great pleasure to introduce the first ever live webcast as part of our Practice Excellence program. It seemed to us at AccountingWEB when we launched this event online that we should really start with the issue that really has got everybody talking within the profession, and that's making tax digital. The government's plan to completely transform the tax system and bring everybody into a not quite real-time, but near real-time tax reporting environment. This is the first of two webcasts today. This one is just, we want to nail the facts and really equip members to know what they're talking about. Later on in the afternoon at 2 p.m, we'll be talking about the implications for practitioners with a practitioner himself and one of our panelists. I'd like to thank Thomson Reuters again for making this Making Tax Digital Day possible, and to introduce Product Manager Mark Purdue, who's going to be giving the company's perspective and a software, technology perspective on that, including the findings from a survey that AccountingWEB did with Thomson Reuters of our members. We also have Clare Sheehan from HMRC to give us the facts. I wouldn't like to say from the horse's mouth, but you'll get the facts as HMRC sees them now. And finally, someone you'll all be familiar with, I hope, on AccountingWEB, Benneyworth, who's going to be bringing in both a practitioner's perspective, and Rebecca's been sort of acting as a go-between between small businesses, accountants and HMRC. So trying to get the message across, dispel some of the myths, and take back information to HMRC about where the snags are, what the problems are, and how maybe HMRC can find ways to solve them. So it's a very high-powered panel. I'd like to thank you all for making the time to come and join us in this innovative new event. And this is what we're going to be talking about. And one important point, there's been a lot of flack, to put it politely, on AccountingWEB. You know, a lot of hostility, people pointing out the flaws, as I shall say it, in HMRC's plans. We're not going to fight those battles here today. We're acting on the assumption that there's some proposals have been put forward to us for consultation. This is what HMRC envisaged could happen, but is looking for feedback from the profession. So we're going to assume that you know, we know what's on the table. We'll talk about what's on the table and what's going to happen. But maybe rather than trying to stop the tide, I think what we want to try and do, where there are points to be made, is bring them to the surface. And certainly the consultation's still open for another 2 weeks from the day of this webcast. So if you are exercised about the proposals, there's still time to research the topic, to find out and to feed your comments back to HMRC. Either AccountingWEB will be responding, but so will the professional bodies, and you can go to HMRC's website and do it yourself by answering their questions there. So we'll talk about what MTD is, then we'll be looking at some of the survey results from the AccountingWEB members, and that'll help us to identify where the issues, where the main issues are. After that, we'll then move on to sort of trying to get clients ready for this experience. It's going to be traumatic enough for the profession, but we think the big challenge is actually putting this across and getting small businesses to comply with what is quite a radical new system. There's also some housekeeping I can tell you about. This isn't all just us talking amongst ourselves. We will be taking, I've got an iPad on my lap here with the questions that you're typing in to the chat facility that's visible on the screen beside you. There's going to be a lot of information flying around, so if you can't take it all in during the broadcast, you can go back to AccountingWEB's YouTube channel later and view it again. We'll be publishing a summary document based around the material in the webinar, and finally we'll be continuing to cover on AccountingWEB as well. So there's lots of ways and lots of resources for you to kind of do your research while the consultation is on and beyond. I think that's all the housekeeping done. It's time to get down to business. I'll kick things off, if you don't mind, very simply. If you aren't fully up to speed with Making Tax Digital, it's a proposal from HMRC that wants all small businesses to start using digital record keeping of some way. The kinds of record keeping systems are still not fully defined in law, and there has been an issue about whether spreadsheets will count or not, but it essentially spells the end of the keeping your receipts in a shoebox or plastic bag and bringing them to the end of the year. With these records kept in a digital format, HMRC is then going to require in the first year, small unincorporated businesses to update them regularly every quarter with an estimate of their income and expenses. And at the end of that process, there'll be a sort of a wash up at the end of the year where allowances and deferred payments and any other quirks can be sort of evened out, sort of the usual roundup. To facilitate and make it easier to report, HMRC is also talking about extending the cash basis, the sort of simplified reporting system that's currently allowed. There's a lot of discussion going on about which businesses will be exempted and at what level will companies be allowed to use the cash basis. So there's a lot up in the air, there's a lot to talk about, and I think we'll get on. Maybe to get us started, Claire, while the consultation's still open, what do you think HMRC is keenest to find out about from accountants?
I guess the overarching point I'd start with is that we have a really unique opportunity here to modernise the tax system and to provide the sort of digital service that businesses and agents get from a lot of other organisations. So the government has announced at a high level what making tax digital is. You've just helpfully summarised that, but how it works is what we're working on at the moment, and the consultations are absolutely key to that. So the one point I would really want everyone who's listening today to take away is to respond to the consultations, because that will give us the opportunity to make sure that this really works in the way that we envisage, that it delivers the sorts of benefits that we want to deliver for businesses and their agents, and we achieve that kind of overall vision of having the most digitally advanced tax administration in the world, which ministers have set for us.
And Rebecca, what would you emphasise about the questions that have been put out in the consultation?
I think I would echo Claire's views. I think although the professional bodies and a number of other representative groups are going to be doing responses to the consultation documents, John, I think that your members out there at the coalface, to use a rather hackneyed term, they know how it is and they know how it's going to affect their clients. And I think, and I'm sure Claire would agree, having that insight from people who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, that can help shape the outcomes here. You know, I'm absolutely passionate about digital, but one of the reasons I got so involved is that I want to help HMRC deliver a digital outcome that works for small businesses and their advisors, and I think they're really, really important because that's where the crunch is going to come. So I would echo Claire's comments. Please, please, please let HMRC have your views, even if you only answer half a dozen questions. That's what my view would be.
Well, we certainly are aware there are challenges ahead on this front, and Mark, it's time to bring you in, because the survey we did put together, I mean, it was a survey we kind of had just about ready, and the day the consultation documents finally arrived, so we did sneak in a few points there we thought might help illuminate it. What were the key findings, you think, that perhaps we can bring to light and highlight the issues that we maybe need to explore more closely today?
Yeah. So firstly, over 1,000 AccountingWEB members took part and gave their views. There were some benefits that they could see, particularly around the 31st of January bottleneck, that disappearing to an extent, and the improving of client records, the fact that clients at the moment may not have strong records, and this is an opportunity to actually strengthen those records. In addition to that, though, there is still a lot of concern out there from people about how it's going to actually work, how clients are going to cope with quarterly reporting, and the fact that a lot of the onus, the perception of the onus, is on the agent. If the clients can't cope, the agent's going to have to sort of pick up the slack, and how is fee income going to be impacted by that? So there's still a lot of concern out there about that. Another thing that came up was just a concern about the timetable. April 2018 sounds like it's a long way away, but it isn't. In software terms, it's very close. And whether or not that's achievable and what the impact's going to be.
I mean, Clare, that's a point several of us have probably raised. Do you think there is much leeway for a timetable? I mean, is HMRC able to respond to there's a bit of a chorus really about people saying, for goodness sakes, wouldn't it make more sense to actually put the exemption up or the sort of put the regime up to the VAT threshold, put things off for another year, and sort of once HMRC is ready to bring VAT online, just do it all at the same time in a year or two later.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, interestingly, I think that some of the points that have picked up in the survey that you've done are things that we've been hearing through our informal consultation we were doing in the run up to publishing the consultation. So as you've picked up on, that's why we've introduced or widened the exemption we already had in place to make the changes optional for all small businesses and landlords with annual income below 10,000. And also we are consulting on giving another group of the smallest businesses more time to respond. So those things are already picking up to an extent on some of those concerns. But you're right that obviously through this survey and through our other engagement, we are hearing more of that. So we'll need to look at what those responses say when all the responses come in, and also ultimately ministers will decide where those thresholds are set and how big the group of people that they defer for. But picking up on the point about time between now and April, I agree with you in some ways. April 18 is a long way off. In other ways, we all know that the time goes quickly. But it's not like we haven't started this. So we already are in what's called private beta for the software development. So we've already started to build the interfaces between our systems and the software industry to allow them to build products to actually start to do this quarterly updating from digital records. We have some of those now have moved into a near live environment. We're recruiting our first businesses. So in the upcoming month or two, there will be real businesses and their agents interacting with the first Making Tax Digital compatible services. That will then expand out to public beta in April of next year, which means it'll be open to a much wider group of people, and that's a year before the changes come in. So that will give us a lot of time to really improve and develop those systems and give everybody the confidence that they're going to work. And I did also just want to pick up on the point about the transitional challenge. Mm-hmm. And really to acknowledge that. So we do recognise that for some businesses and the agents that represent them, this is a really significant change. So although we are absolutely confident that once they've made that transition, there'll be real benefits for those businesses, and it's heartening to see that the survey's picked up on some of those. At the same time, though, we do recognise that for some businesses who are not currently doing things in a digital way, this is a big transition, and we're recognising that already in some of the things we've done. So for example, we're consulting on providing financial assistance to the smallest businesses, and we've asked for views on what that should look like. We are also looking at what support we put in place to help people transition to the changes. So I think we've recognised that, and we absolutely need to make sure that we put the right support in place. And of course, given that a large proportion of the small business population and the business population were generally represented by agents will have a key role to play in that.
Well, Rebecca, you're caught up in that consultation sort of quagmire. What you saw the sort of survey results, we showed them to you. What were the points you amplified to HMRC and you think are the biggest concerns?
I think for me, one that's coming out now as opposed to right at the beginning of the consultation period is training. I think this is going to be massive, and I think I know Clare and the team, even very senior people at HMRC, have been out to meet businesses, but I think part of what I want to do with them over the next few weeks is start giving some exposure to clients who maybe don't shove everything in a box, but maybe use an exercise book to write their transactions up. And my concern as an agent, and I've been in practice 30 years now, so I've seen it all pretty much. My concern is that what you've got is people who are not digitally confident. You know, some of my clients will not use online banking because they don't trust it.
And that came out in the survey.
Yeah.
There was some very high
So
percentages there.
quite a high percentage, and Lloyds Bank published a survey last week highlighting quite a high level of digital, what do they call it, discomfort, I think, with all sorts of digital things. Did they shop online and so on, looking at small businesses. So you've got that, and you've also got the fact that actually they don't really understand accounting. They can record their transactions, but give them a digital tool, and there's a risk, and I know members out there will immediately see where I'm going with this. There is a risk that they can make a very big mess, a very, very big mess, and then that takes a lot of time for us to rework. I mean, picking up really on Mark's point, I think, you know, firms are going to have to sort of try and work out which way to go. One of my lines on it is really we need to just see a little bit more the outcome of the consultations, but then what we've got to be ready to do is think about those clients who are definitely in, how they're going to be trained in using the software, because if we let them loose with the software without them being properly trained, everybody's going to regret it, including HMRC. And then maybe those who aren't in the first tranche, once we've got a good body of people actually doing it, then maybe they'll buy into it. And maybe we, as firms, will say, actually, we'd quite like you to do this. I do quite welcome the end of people rocking up at my office. I used to have one client always showed up on Christmas Eve because she knew I'd be in with her carrier bag, you know, and it's like, oh. So all of that, I think, you know, I think that will dissipate. I think this is right. I do myself in my practice see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel in terms of having more up-to-date records, being able to advise my clients in the way I want to be able to advise them, rather than running behind trying to pick up the pieces and asking them questions that were about things that happened 14 months ago and they haven't got a clue what the answer is. In fact, they can't even remember what that was all about.
I mean, I do think that's crucially important, the point you were making before about the client ability. I mean, the client challenge is probably what screams out at us from the results. So I think we will pick up on that, and so let's start digging a little bit.
Yep. But
probably while we do that, Claire, maybe what we first need to establish is what exactly is this animal that they're going to need to learn to ride. You know, could you just very briefly summarise the kind of the mechanics of quarterly updating, and you know what it'll look like, and then things like the likely time spans you've got after the end of the quarter to report. You know, how's it just going to work in outline?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So, I mean, the exact way the digital record keeping will work will depend largely on the choices that individual businesses and their agents make about the sort of software they want to use. So there's already a range of digital record keeping products available on the market. Obviously that will grow as a result of the Making Tax Digital changes. Some of that is desktop based, some of that is using smartphones and tablets, and so there'll be choices there. But broadly speaking, what we're asking businesses to do is to keep their records on a regular basis as they're going along using their digital records. So they already have a requirement to keep their records. What we're saying now is we want them to keep them digitally. And then as the end of the quarter approaches, their digital software that they're using will prompt them that they'll need to send an update.
We're getting a few comments from the viewers actually that they're concerned that it's almost putting them in a position of over-reliance on the software developers. I mean, just very briefly, since we just wanted to answer the question since it came through, but is that a risk you feel as a software developer, or are you and your colleagues rubbing your palms and thinking this is a gold mine being handed to you? But how would you let answer that question that customers could be at risk of depending on you too much?
Software is going to play a key role. That doesn't mean they're necessarily depending on the software developer as such, and it certainly doesn't mean software developers are going to start profiting from this change, like I've seen comments on AccountingWEB suggesting as such. Software developers play a key role. We're already, for 12 months, more than that, we've been interacting with HMRC in meetings to flesh out exactly how it's going to work and how we can interact with these APIs. So yeah, these digital record keeping is a key thing. software developers will play a key role in scoping out what they are.
And actually, I see it as a partnership between three different groups, which is probably not then a partnership, is it? But I think that the successful delivery of this is going to depend on HMRC, the software industry, and agents working really closely together. Because between us, we've got the opportunity to really make this work and make it really deliver on the promise of it. So I think the power and the reliance rests on all three working together in the right way.
Well, we've heard from HMRC and from the software people. Rebecca, it's over to the third year, the third leg on the stool. There are challenges there for the profession. Which would be the ones you really flag up?
The record keeping, John, I mean, as an accountant, what I can see is that once you've got those digital records with a certain degree of integrity, then you've cracked it, because you press a button for a quarterly update, and then the accountant does his bit at the end of the year, and you've got your annual sign-off 9 months after. But it's sort of like the car that's going to run the race until you can actually learn to drive this car. And most of my clients are still in a horse and cart, or worse. So actually getting them sort of to tell them, right, see that it's got a wheel on each corner, and actually when you turn this bit it goes around corners. I think it's quite a good analogy, because heck, that is a big jump. And whether we do that for them, whether we actually bring the bookkeeping in-house, has got to be a decision for practices to make. But that's certainly one of the developments that I envisage as a possibility, is that I stop relying on clients with scrappy bits of paper and exercise books, and I say, do you know what, actually, we'll do it. And that's, that I think.
And could I just pick up on one point there, actually, because I think it's really crucial. Yes, the transition to from the horse and cart to the fully functioning car is a big one for people, but that actually speaks to the heart of why we're doing this. So at the moment, there's a huge amount of error and tax lost through carelessness. So this is not from people deliberately avoiding tax. This is from people making mistakes, in part because of the quality of the records that they're keeping. So, that's why we want people to change from the horse and cart.
Yeah, but on the other side of the coin, HMRC is experiencing what it sees as a loss. It seems, from the accountants and the business perspective, you're imposing costs on business. I think that came through the survey as a very high issue. The sums being quoted for what it's going to cost the businesses in terms of software every year, and increased accountant fees. That's a burden HMRC is placing on business.
I would challenge that. So for the smallest businesses, we've committed to making sure that there are free software products available. So I'm not suggesting software costs are the only costs, but we have made that commitment, and we're working with the software industry on that and having some really positive discussions about that. And I think it's helpful to separate out transitional costs and steady state costs. So HMRC has a target, an ambitious target, to reduce burdens on businesses by £400 million a year. Making Tax Digital will play a role in that. We've published an initial impact assessment in one of the main consultations, and we've asked for views and evidence to really flesh that out. But separately, there is the transitional cost. But I mean, if you look at the scale of the money that's being lost, and actually the tax gap figures that were published last week, although the tax gap itself has stayed broadly the same, there's been an increase in particular what we call failure to take reasonable care. So that's people not keeping good enough records. So when you look at how that then translates into all of our lives and the impact on provision of public services that don't have that tax money to pay for them, I think that is all of our problem.
We may return to, I think, during the software part of the conversation, we may return to the costs, because there are some very interesting points there. I've had a comment from Barry Coles, actually, who helped kick me to remind me to go back to the basics. We talked about sort of the quarterly reports and the time, but not just, we'll get into these sort of deadlines and things, but Rebecca, the accounting side of quarterly updates is going to be a challenge. How does the consultation document envisage that you'll be putting in these estimates quarterly, but how will the sorting out capital allowances and all the sort of washing up? I mean, there are proposals to simplify and actually alter accepted accounting, alter GAAP to fit with the new regime.
Yeah, I think if members haven't looked at beyond consultation A, as I call it, the main consultation, bringing business tax into the digital age. I think the second consultation I think they would very much welcome is the simplification consultation, and there are a number of proposals in there, widening access to the cash basis, and as you said, John, maybe making some alterations to gap-based accounts. So let me just sort of try and frame that a bit more clearly in accountant speak. One way or another, you have got some digital records. These digital records will record the transactions in the period. So they're not so much an estimate, they are a sort of snapshot of what's gone on during that quarter. It is pretty likely that small businesses will prepare those on a cash basis. Whether they're actually going to report for the year end on a cash basis, I think they'll prepare those on a cash basis. One of the bits of feedback we gave to HMRC as Digital Advisory Group prior to the consultations was that we recommended that HMRC take as flexible a view as possible about these sorts of things, so that businesses that have already got established quarterly accounts could actually carry on doing what they're doing. A lot of our clients don't have any sort of periodic reporting because they write their books up way after the year end. But once we've got a quarter's digital records, you can make accruals adjustments, you can claim capital allowances if you want to, but you don't have to. So you can make accounting adjustments and tax adjustments on a quarterly basis or on an annual basis. You'll do your 4 quarters, and then there'll be 9 months, which most of us won't need, but there's 9 months allowed. We'll be able to sort of space the work out rather than doing it all in January. To do any checking that we want to do, we might do that quarterly, but we might do it on an annual basis to make any adjustments, disallowed items and things like that. They may be dealt with on a quarterly, but we'll do it on an annual basis and maybe put through the capital allowance claims. And one point I'll make about those capital allowance claims, if members would like to think about this, is that if one of the ultimate objectives is to get a fix on your tax figure as you go through the year, then if you make capital expenditure, it will be a jolly good idea to claim those annual investment allowances as you go along, so that you're getting a closer fit to what your final tax figure is going to be. So the answer is it's pretty flexible. You can choose which way you want to do it.
John in the audience,
Yeah.
hello John, has just popped in, and sort of it's something that cropped up again quite early.
Yeah.
Jointly held assets, that's let's say bank accounts, bank interest. Yep. That's something that I think the mechanism isn't able to accommodate now. I mean, Mark, have you cracked that one yet, or does it depend on HMRC getting its systems in a state where it can separate out income statements?
On joint income, take the bank interest example. My understanding is that the quality of the data that HMRC are going to receive is going to improve, so that bank interest is going to be populated in the tax account, even if that's joint income. Things like joint property income, that needs to be reported by one of the owners, the nominated record holder, if you like, and they report on behalf of all of the property owners. So it gets reported once and pushed to each of the tax accounts. Similar process will exist for partnerships as well.
Okay, I thank you for sorting out the accountant side of things there, Rebecca. Can you help us again and know the issue that's been, we've been worrying about dependence on the software companies, but the agents are also very concerned with the mechanisms and the new regime. They're not, how they're going to be able to access and ensure that their clients' tax accounts are what they expect them to be. How will that mechanism work? I guess, you're building it a little bit, Mark. HMRC has specified the interfaces, but you're building. How is that work coming along? So
agent access has been the key thing that is necessary for this to work, because the agent needs to access the client data. There was a delay with Brexit, as with the consultation documents, on the finer detail of talking about agent access. The last time I sat down with HMRC to talk about the detail, early next year, they will have the mechanisms in place for us to hook into, which means provided you are authorised to access a client's data today, you will be able to log into your software, authorise the software to access your client's information on the gateway, and that software will then be able to poll the APIs on behalf of your clients. So early next year at some point you'll be able to open up your tax product, create a tax return, and that will be able to go off and query and find out what information HMRC knows.
And that's absolutely crucial to this working as well, because obviously agents have a key role to play and will continue to have a key role to play in their clients' affairs. And so even as early as the testing that we're starting now, we're doing that with both businesses and agents to make sure that we're involving them right from the start.
And I'll just back that up with certainly a mantra that HMRC have quoted at me, which I think is absolutely great, is that agents will be able to see and do everything that their clients can see and do. So it's a case of getting the software sorted. I mean, one thing that I think accountants might like to sort of gel out in their minds is we talk about software, and I know that that lots of companies produce tax software and accounting software, but I think one of the things that's a bit of a sticky point at the moment, and that I know HMRC is working on, is that we've got accounts prep software or even accounting record type software, and then we've got over here in the accountant's office tax software. Now, most cloud-based accounting software that I know has got an accountant's login, so that if the client has been keeping the records, the accountant can climb in and have a look and correct it or whatever. But then over here is this other bit that might not talk to that bit because it might be a different company, and I think some of that is quite crucial. And I know HMRC are working, and my end of that is making sure, or trying to make sure, and helping HMRC to identify that there is a good range of products for accountants at a good price range.
Although you raise an interesting point there, Rebecca, and it's one that's been made on AccountingWEB, that one of the problems that the profession has with making tax digital and the consultation process, so HMRC is sort of conflating different disciplines of the accounting disciplines and the tax filing discipline, and almost sort of extending tax filing to become a sort of the sole and intended purpose of record keeping. Businesses do keep records for other reasons, as Mark's pointed out. I guess how would the three of you sort of answer that? And I think even we talk about the legislation, as sort of the law is almost dictating to companies, not that they should keep adequate records for tax purposes, but how to create it. Do you, either of you, sort of see much relevance in that assertion that they're trying to change what accounting is a little bit at HMRC?
I can see what members are thinking, and although accountants can be a little bit precious about accounting because it's their thing, I can also see that very small businesses quite often only want accounts for their tax return and the mortgage, and that's really all they need it for. I'm very keen to give my clients a bit more insight into their businesses that I could do if I could get at the records earlier. And those accounts that you prepare might look completely different to what you report to HMRC, because they'll be based on something that your client can relate to and use for decision making. So I don't think HMRC is dictating what accounts are or how accounts should be prepared. But if I just take a German example, in Germany, tax law actually dictates what accounts look like. So it really does. The law actually tells you how you prepare your accounts. And I don't think we're going there. However, I do also feel a bit sensitive about the government telling small businesses that they must do X or do Y. But, that's because I'm British,
okay.
And, I don't like being told what to do.
Okay. We're just having a few little questions from the floor. So Claire, you'll be glad to hear there's quite a few people wanting to find out how they get into the beta program, and I guess that might interest you as well, Mark. But there was someone wanted to pick you up on the point you sort of said, the opportunity to correct errors sort of annually.
Mm-hmm.
I think what kind of errors do you think crop up or that HMRC is trying to eradicate?
So there's a whole range of errors. So from people missing out receipts and invoices, and that can go in both directions. Of course, that could be that they're paying more tax than they need to, as well as less tax. Through to transposition errors. So people, because obviously you've got to take the information from one place and log in somewhere else and type it in somewhere else. So people putting in the incorrect information just because they're making mistakes like that. Through to people claiming the wrong things that they're not allowed to claim, or not claiming things they are allowed to claim. So there's a whole range of things. So some of them will be addressed to at least some extent by the very fact of keeping records in closer to real time and keeping them digitally, and the structure that will give. But we're also looking at how we can add more value through the introduction of nudges and prompts into the software to help people get things right as they're going along, and particularly to help people make sure they're claiming the right reliefs and allowances as they're going along.
Again, that's one of those little flash points within the profession. We probably don't have time to answer here, but we will pick up in the afternoon session. Mark, any other, before we move on to sort of, I think we've identified this client challenge is merits some attention. Before we move on, are there any other software related issues you'd highlight?
I think the key one is agent access, and as Rebecca picked up on, in this future world of bookkeeping data over here and tax information over here, integration between products has got to improve. That's going to be a challenge for everyone, but that's what is needed to streamline this process as much as we can. Okay, well, we have kind of pinpointed the biggest challenge beyond integration and systems and processes is client competence and education. So how are we going to? There have been some constructive conversations at AccountingWEB. How you begin, even now where the details, the shape, the outline is sort of there, but the detail doesn't exist. Are there things you would recommend AccountingWEB members are doing with their clients now, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I think that everybody should at least make their clients aware that this is coming. The level of detail, I mean, one of the criticisms is that maybe businesses out there don't know anything about this. I think accountants have been trying to get their heads around it, and now they're just about ready to start saying to their clients, right, this is what it involves. Yeah. I think clients need to know that something is coming and that big changes are coming. John, you've called it the biggest change since self-assessment. I'll go further and say it's the biggest change since income tax was invented in, 1790 something. I think, clients need to know. I don't think clients want terribly to get engaged with all of the detail about this will happen and that will happen and you've got a choice about this. But the real key, we've talked about competence, the real key is starting this process of digital record keeping. What I'm doing with my clients at the moment is I'm not moving them immediately onto digital products, but I'm working with the one or two what I'll call the outliers to say, maybe we don't use 4 different bank accounts, and maybe we, try and get it all in one account, because the accounting will be much easier if we've got a single account. And just thinking about those sorts of things, encouraging people, if they've got the confidence, to use contactless instead of cash, because it's much, much easier to get a hold of the records of that expenditure. And these, I wonder about HMRC's view that we're going to close tax gap. I think for represented clients, my approach has always been, I want to prove completeness of income. I will not submit client figures to HMRC unless I've reconciled the bank, which the client doesn't do. So I'm happy that I've got the detail on the actual figures correct. I want my clients to be able to keep sufficient records so that when I look at it, I am comfortable they put all their income in and there isn't any income going walkabout. So I certainly for represented clients, maybe accountants who work like me, who take that view, then I think all the income's in there. I think the people where the income isn't in there are the people who are deliberately not reporting their income, and they'll carry on doing that. So I think that income issue is one. And certainly clients, I tend to say, no receipt, no record of payment, it's not going in. in the same way as I will heave out shoes or clothing or childcare or whatever else my client thinks might be deductible or ought to be. So I think there's a bit of a split here in that probably represented businesses are quite near where HMRC wants them to be. I think, not every accountant does it the same, but in terms of moving forward, you've got to start thinking about what software you're going to use. Are you going to have the same software across your practice? You're going to let your clients choose what they want.
Yeah, I mean, very much things are going to change.
Moving. That's the trouble. Early adoption, and you might pick the wrong. You might buy Betamax instead of VHS, and so we'll just have to sort of see. But I think clients need to know, and they need to know that they are going to have to be more disciplined, and that whether they're keeping their records or whether I'm doing it for them, they're going to have to be more disciplined.
I guess they're going to have to be more disciplined. Clare, it appears during the consultation HMRC has been going to the more educated end of the market and to agents. What efforts will the department be making to help this massive education effort that's going to be needed?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess the natural people who tend to engage with consultations generally are, the professional bodies and the rep bodies more often. But we've really tried very hard through these consultations, because we recognise the kind of wide-ranging impact of them, to go out as widely as we possibly can. So we've gone out proactively through people like childminder rep bodies, builder rep bodies, to try and get directly to people who maybe wouldn't engage normally. We also produced a short guide to the consultations specifically aimed at small businesses. So I think it's unrealistic to think that a small business owner is going to sit down and read even one of these consultations, never mind all 6 of them. So we pulled together, and Rebecca helped us with this to get the tone right, which was really welcome. Just a short guide, so 6 pages, that just pulls out, at a very high level, what is this about and what are the key questions that you should feed in on. So I think we have done an awful lot to try and reach out more widely, but obviously, people are busy running their businesses and don't necessarily engage with us as much as we would like them to. We have gone out, as Rebecca said, to meet small businesses and actually, to see them in their own environment and actually hear what they're doing. I really welcome Rebecca's offer to do more of that. I think that would be really valuable to us. We're also doing some research. So we did some qualitative research earlier on this year to better understand in particular how people feel about digital, because you could characterise this in different ways, but some small businesses, the smallest businesses, are very comfortable with digital and will have no problem with this transition. Some people who maybe run slightly larger businesses, who you might think will be better equipped, might actually really like the confidence with digital. So we're following that up now with some qualitative research to really get under the skin of that and to understand those populations better, to augment what we're getting through the consultation responses, so then we can make sure we've got a range of responses in place that react to those different needs.
I was very interested when you mentioned that the private beta is already up and running. Mark, are you and some of digital users involved in those test runs?
At this stage, no. For the private beta, HMRC are rolling it out very slowly. So where we are with the private beta is around January, February time. They've asked for a certain number of submissions to come in through digital software. So we're going to be inviting a very small number of transactions they're looking for. So a small number of our users to take part in the private beta. The private beta is really there to check the communication mechanism and, to be blunt, nothing more. It's making sure that HMR system works. Public beta, which kicks in April, that, again, it's going to start off slowly, but the scope of that is going to increase dramatically. So I think that's the one that the vast majority of software users would want to be engaged with.
But in the private beta, actually, is a good opportunity to just mention this, because I know that there's been some concern that we're going with the people who are already digitally confident in that. As Mark said, we're going for a small number of people, but we're trying to make that as representative as we can of the wider taxpayer population. So that includes people who currently file on paper, people who file using HMRC free software rather than through commercial software, people who are represented by agents, people who aren't represented by agents, so that we make sure we start to test some of those different interactions and we can pick up early on some of the issues that they have.
Okay.
My vision, John, just to come in, is to, I've got between myself and another practice a selection of clients that I've promising HMRC can come and meet, but my vision is to actually work with them. And they might not be part of HMRC's private beta, but what we'll be doing is testing and actually, you know, I might do video diaries of how they get on with it and just introducing them slowly, because that again will give HMRC much more information about the practical day-to-day things that a business is going to have to do and agents are going to have to do, so that they can start thinking about what support they need to develop to help that.
I quite like that, because also really, you know, you're doing it as an advisory thing, but for your own client base, what's working for the ones you've tested it on, you can replicate. So you know, it is feasible to do your own testing in that way. Okay, there's lots more to talk about. We've had questions coming in, so I will be taking some of those. Probably we can go for another. We have to wind up in about 15 minutes. So we'll take as many questions as we can. Before we go to the Q&A though, Claire, we are in the middle of the consultation process. There is the software testing tonight. Can you give us sort of your sense of how the project is going to progress between now and, say, April?
Yeah, sure. So the consultations close on the 7th of November, so that's the next big deadline that's coming up. At that point, we'll obviously then sit down and read all of the consultation responses. We've had some already, which is great. We've also had a lot of insights from the engagement activity we've been doing. So we've been doing webinars, we've been doing face-to-face events, various other things. So we'll bring all of that together. So then the next thing, I guess, that people will see externally is when we publish the summary of responses and the draft legislation. So there'll be another opportunity at that point to feed in views on the consultation on the draft legislation, and then that will be introduced as part of Finance Bill next year.
Okay, so it's a quick thing. Okay, so we are going to move to questions. One that was just hanging around from the end of it, but keeps cropping up, and maybe I'll start with Mark, but you may need to help him out. Everyone wants to know, where are they going to get this free software from, and when is it ready? Mark, can you give us a delivery date, or can
I can tell you the discussions I've been involved with HMRC. As Claire mentioned, HMRC have made this commitment to provide free software.
But they're not writing it?
At this stage, no, they're not writing it. They've looked to software providers to say, we would like some free software, discuss. So the type of areas being discussed is first off defining what someone with simple tax affairs is. And the discussions are looking at sort of a turnover limit, if you like. So if you're unrepresented, you run a small business within certain confines, then the idea is there will be apps and other software available for you to record your transactions and click on a button and do your quarterly submissions. So you will be compliant, you know, within the scope of the free software. One thing that HMRC have certainly clarified to me is they don't view agents as falling in with that definition of free software. If you're an agent charging for a service, then the software that you need to access that client data is not going to be free of charge.
And I mean, I would agree with everything that Mark said, and just to sort of expand upon the point about working with them on the free software. So we're working at the moment on a memorandum of understanding between HMRC and the software providers that will set out in more detail the basis on which those relationships are going to work, including on free software, but also on things like cyber security, because I know that's an area that, you know, people have had real concerns about, and obviously it's in neither our nor your interest for the security around this not to be absolutely top notch, but it's important that we are really clear on what that relationship should look like from a security perspective. So that memorandum of understanding will really help to set out much more clearly how that relationship will work and give people the confidence that they're that they can trust in it. And on the free software in particular, and also just more widely on the question of how people choose software, that is definitely an area where we have identified, and I think we said in the consultation as well, that we will be providing support to customers to help them to choose the right software for them. So we won't be saying, you know, choose Mark's over somebody else's, but what we will be able to say is, you know, for a business like you, this is the sort of software that could work for you. This is the free options that are available to you to help with that choice.
Yeah,
certainly Digital Advisory Group have been involved in some of that. Kevin Hart from BASDA is one of our members, and Kevin has been spending a huge amount of time with HMRC working on the Memorandum of Understanding. I think it's absolutely important to reinforce to your members that they are going to have to pay for software, or their clients are going to have to pay for software, and that the free software is aimed at the unrepresented. And I think that's fair enough, because what we're talking about is potentially reducing the market available to software companies and then undermining their business case to actually put the money, and a lot of money, into developing software. So, you know, it's sort of the way of life, really.
Great. Well, it's free range now. We have a few more minutes for questions from the floor. So if you are watching this, there was a quiet patch, but it started firing up again. My iPad is buzzing with queries. There was one from earlier. If we can go back to the year-end issue, and this kind of connects to sort of some of the transitional difficulties for agents. Liam wanted to know, is the Making Tax Digital year-end process compulsory? Now, I think you've said earlier, if you correct it as you go along, there's no need. But Liam was concerned also if they get into the sort of the 18-19 year ends for self-assessment. That transition, are they going to actually have to do a self-assessment, and almost like doubling for a period for some practitioners the workload over that period? Is that likely to play out the way he's imagining?
Well, so if I've understood correctly, what you're talking about is the fact that we're bringing everything forward. So in the transitional period, people will be doing the current year's activity in the new world while still completing the time lag activity in the old world. And yes, that is part of the transitional challenge. And it's exactly those sorts of things that we really need to make sure we nail down in understanding that transitional challenge. And just a plea on that. So on the consultation responses we've had so far, we've asked quite a lot of questions about impacts and in particular transitional challenges, and we've had some general feedback but not very much in the way of specific feedback, so it'd be really helpful to kind of feedback those sorts of things and estimates of how much time people think that would take to really help inform some of that thinking, and also what help people would value in making that transition.
It's quite hard for people to actually give hard figures. I know in putting the Digital Advisory Group's response together, I just had to sit down and sort of say, well, how much extra time do I think? And that is quite hard. I think people can start to get a handle on software costs and things like that, but this transitional year, you're absolutely right, as with anything, and as with also this voluntary pay-as-you-go, there comes a point where the two systems overlap. And yeah, I think that as well as the transition being a transition to new software, new processes, you're still going to have the other stuff coming along, which is why I'm starting to talk to clients now to try and, if you like, move things up a bit as we go through to April 18. But one of the other things I wanted to add is that how you will migrate to MTD will be determined by your year end, so that you'll start for the first accounting period. The proposal is first accounting period starting on or after 6th of April 18, you'll start doing MTD. But that does mean that you will be migrating different clients at different times. But the problem is that my own view is that if you're changing software and changing processes, you don't want to be doing that mid-period. But you also don't want to be doing it in the first quarter when you've got to report to HMRC a month after the end of the first quarter. So people are going to have to bite the bullet quite quickly. And some of that might mean that because of the delays with Brexit and the delay in the consultation document, HMRC ultimately, probably with the software industry, might need to be a bit more flexible about starting.
There's a lot of confusion or uncertainty here about actual quarter dates and period dates. Could you just clarify that? How, Liam, I think it was worried, is everyone going to have the 5th of April as a year end? Is that going to be specified? Could you just very briefly summarise what's suggested in the consultation about?
Yeah, so we're proposing to retain the flexibility for people to set their accounting periods, and we'd be interested in views on that. And then the quarterly cycle will start from that point onwards. So at the end of the quarter, we're proposing a month after that will be the deadline for sending the quarterly update, and then 9 months after the end of the year to then do that finalising activity. Although, as Rebecca said, that's going to be significantly significantly less activity than they would do now for a self-assessment return. So it might well be that people bring forward that activity a lot sooner in that 9-month period.
And presumably, is it safe to make the assumption if you are in a VAT registered company, you know, when it gets around to your turn to come into the regime, MTD will just sort of lock in to the same VAT periods you're reporting on at the moment? I
mean, that would make sense for people to take that opportunity to do them at the same time, and then they can, you know, get the benefits of you know, doing a single update and all in one go.
Okay, sorry.
I was just going to say, John, it probably does militate towards lining up your year end with your VAT quarters if you haven't already, because otherwise you're probably going to have to do extra updates a year just to cover all of your VAT responsibilities. So I think that's quite a good plan. There's
one issue which I think I'll probably bring up on behalf of our members that we didn't touch on earlier was penalties. And there's one of the more cynical comments on AccountingWEB was the whole reason to bring in MTD is just because it's going to be such a mess. HMRC is just going to reap a massive return from all the penalties it's going to levy. What again, we've only got a few minutes left. What are the proposals there, Clare, and how would you answer that suspicion?
I mean, I would hope that people don't seriously think that we introduce things and make them so hard solely so that we can charge penalties, because I mean that would be pretty shocking, and it's absolutely not the case. In fact, it's the opposite. So we have published one of the consultations on tax administration that actually builds on a discussion document and consultation that we did last year that goes much wider than just making tax digital, but it starts to bring in more detail about how the new approach would work with making tax digital. And what we're actually proposing is moving away from the idea of automated penalties where, you know, you get something late, but, you know, on one occasion and you're hit with a penalty straight away. Moving to something more of a points-based system, so similar to you might get with a driving licence, where you get points for each late submission that you make, and only when those points hit a certain level do you reach a penalty, because our penalty system is not about making money out of customers. I can say that absolutely unequivocally. It's actually about driving the right behaviours and making sure that people provide the information that we need at the time that we need it. And so by giving that leeway, I think we recognise the fact that, you know, businesses have a whole load of things going on. It might be that occasionally something is happening that means, you know, they do get something wrong once, and actually getting that point on their, you know, on their record at that point will, you know, be, you know, all that's needed to then make sure that they don't do that in the future. And it's, you know, we don't want to be penalising people who are trying to get it right, and occasionally life gets in the way. So we're consulting in that on what exactly that should be, you know, what level. We've put some suggestions in there, but we'd welcome views on that. And the other thing that we've said in that is that we would want to introduce a soft landing for this in terms of penalties. So we're proposing that we wouldn't start levying any penalties or starting any points for people in the first year, in recognition of the fact that, you know, there will be challenges for some of making the changes, and we don't want those people to be penalised.
Okay, thanks. So there's so much more. I'm sorry I can't pick up and put all of your questions to Clare and the panel. It's a huge topic, which is the reason that we've scheduled another webinar at 2 p.m. to dig more deeply with Rebecca into the practice implications. There's so much we've touched on there that's not just going to make life difficult and challenge the small businesses. The accountants are going to have to go through a lot of change to that. So do come back at 2 p.m. for that. But before we wrap up, as I say, there's links at the end of the document next on screen where you can download a lot of the documentation we've talked about. But very briefly, just a few seconds each before we go, what would be your key takeaway? What's the one thing we've said today that you think the people watching this should bear in mind and act on today? So Mark,
with my software developer hat on, I think if a software user wants to take part in the beta program, get in contact with your software provider. I think the main benefit for a user is going to be that public beta that starts sort of April time next year. But yeah, keep engaged with your software developer.
Respond to the consultations, and do start to have the conversations with your clients now.
And Rebecca, last word.
Tell HMRC how it is for you and how it's going to be for your clients. Please do.
Okay, that's just about it for this. It's been a full hour. All those questions that you were asked, we will assemble them. I mean, some of them kind of were along the same lines, and I tried to put them to the panel. But we'll collect those together and include those in our summary document, which it'll take us a day or two to prepare, but do download that and keep coming back to AccountingWEB. We will be staying on this project for the next year and beyond. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you, Rebecca, Claire and Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we'll talk again within just a couple of hours about the impacts on practice. Thank you very much.